Hello and welcome back for another Unreal Engine 5 tutorial. This is Ben Blau, and today our focus is going to be on setting up an AI enemy. You may recall that earlier today I sent you a zipped up project that contained this asset, this particular skeletal mesh of an orc. And I did set it up as a complete character, meaning that I created an animation blueprint for it on your behalf. So it's got all of its locomotion capabilities, including walking and running. And I've also retargeted one combat animation to it, but there are others, and you can feel free to implement as many as you like. Our player character is still Aridel, and I've got the player start on the opposite side of this barrier here that I just made out of a simple static mesh. I don't care if you have a material on it because I just set up this new level as a staging area in order to make sure that everything was working correctly. Now, since this is AI, one of the first things that you want to remember to do is look at your environment and decide how much of this region you want the AI to be able to locomote to. So we need something called a nav mesh bounds volume, and I've already added mine here to the level. If you want to add your own, it's not going to come with one automatically, so you just search up here for nav mesh bounds volume. And what you need to do is drag it into the level. At first it's going to seem like a small box. And then you're going to use the scaling tool until it encompasses the entirety. You can see this is the wireframe for my current nav mesh bounds volume, so that it encompasses the entire area, including the z-axis that you want your AI to be able to reach. So I've set that up in advance just to prevent this video from being overly long. So let me show you the mechanics that have been set up so far, and then we're going to do a lot of this together. If I hit play, I kind of hear it off in the distance. You can ignore my print strings. Those were just for debugging purposes. But if it sees me, it's going to come after me and try to attack me. And I've got this set up in such a way that if I can evade it for at least 2 seconds, 1, 2, then it's going to lose interest in me and start patrolling again. But now it saw me again. And now it's patrolling once more because it's lost track of me. The next time it sees me, it's going to come after me again and try to hurt me. Okay, so by the end of this video, what we're going to learn how to do is to give the orc a health parameter, and we're going to enable Aridel to draw her sword and inflict damage upon that enemy orc and eventually kill it. So let me just show you some of the scripting that I've already done here. First of all, obviously there's a little bit of sound design on the orc. I called it the monster footsteps, and I made a sound cue out of it, out of several layers. And I just edited lots of different footstep types of sounds and processed them in Pro Tools, randomized each layer, and then with modulators, randomized their pitch a little bit more, included them all in this mixer, and added one final modulator to the final output. So every footstep is going to sound a little bit different. And that's one monster sound cue. That's probably more than was necessary. Now, in my orc blueprint, I want you to recall that I did set this up fully already on your behalf. So if I go to the mesh, I did set up the animation blueprint. And in fact, you can find both of these easily. The character is here in third person under blueprints, and I made this character in the same way that I made Aridel. I simply took the BP third-person character, I duplicated it, and then I customized it. And forget about the blueprint script for the time being, but in the viewport, you can see that what I've done is I've changed out the skeletal mesh, and I have assigned the animation blueprint that I created for it. Okay, and the way that I made that animation blueprint was by basically retargeting Manny's animation blueprint plus a bunch of retargeted animations to this character. And I basically just changed out the idle animation and made my own blend space for its locomotion. And it's working out pretty well. So this is already set up. You don't have to do any of the retargeting. The animation blueprint and the character is fully ready to go because I wanted to allow you to save some time on that part. I know you've done plenty of retargeting this semester, so you should have that down by now. This blueprint also contains an audio component that I added. And the audio component is this monster loop cue that I made. And that is just moaning and groaning so that it follows the monster around. And if you want to hear this cue, it should just loop and loop and loop. And both of these wave players are the same, except I've detuned them relative to one another. So using this modulator, you can see that the min and max pitch are different compared to this modulator, right? So that creates kind of like a weird sound that I think is appropriate. So that, as an audio component inside of the Orcs blueprint, which is a child of the mesh, means that it's going to follow this mesh around wherever it goes. I did mess with the attenuation override. As you can see here, I overrode the attenuation and changed some things about the inner radius and fall-off distance so that it would sound closer to appropriate within this context. So let's save that again, and I'll show you what happens. I can hear it. We still have footsteps and things on Aridel. And if I try to spy on the orc, right now it's patrolling. It's unaware of my existence. And it's just walking around. I can't hear it from this far away, by the way. But if I get close enough, we can hear it. And if it gets close enough to me, it tries to attack. I also have it set up so that if I can evade it for at least, in my case, 2 seconds, it's going to go back to patrolling until it sees me again. Oh, and it saw me just there. It's going to try to catch up with me and beat me up. Unless I evade it again for at least 2 seconds. Maybe I'll shorten that. Woo! It's not losing track of me very easily. 1, 2. So now you can tell from my print string it's back to patrolling. And if it sees me yet again, it'll come after me. Now, Aridel can still draw her sword. And perform all of the attack animations that have been retargeted. And eventually, we're going to be able to inflict damage on that orc and kill it. So let me just give you a little bit of a tour of some of the scripting that I've done inside of the orc itself. Okay, so here is this orc, and let's see. I've got the audio component, which probably is too low there. So I'm just gonna, because that's coming from his face. So I'll just lift that up. That should be a little bit better. Compile and save. And here in the viewport, we can see the inner radius, which I made small, and the outer radius, which I made a little bit larger in the attenuation override. I made the inner radius small because I wanted to be able to better pinpoint its exact location to be able to have it spatialize better. And that is absolutely a mono sound cue for that purpose. So you may remember from class that we added this special component called pawn sensing. And in the pawn sensing component, what you can do is you can specify things like the sensing interval, and the pawn sensing interval by default, I think it starts out at 0.5. And that means that it's updating its tick every time it sends out a sensing probe, so to speak. It's happening every half second. Now, personally, I find that I usually have to reduce that quite a bit because if I don't, sometimes it loses track of me even when it should not. I want it to update its sensing interval more frequently. So in this example, I set it to 0.05, which means that it's updating every 1/10 of a second, okay? Or something like that, 0.5 of a second. We're not making use of hearing, and we have the ability to set the peripheral vision angle. That defaults to 90 degrees, but I wanted to be able to more easily evade it, so I set it to 80. We can also set our sight radius, which determines how far it can see, but I left mine at the default of 5,000 because I thought that was good enough. Now, with pawn sensing, there are events associated with that, and you can implement them in the event graph. So let me give you a tour of what's going on here in my event graph. At the very beginning, on begin play, I know ultimately that I need this orc to be able to chase after Aerodel. So I needed to get a reference to Aerodel as soon as I could. So on begin play, I used get player character first. Just right click in an empty area and search for get player character. Make sure the index remains at 0. And then we pull off of the return value and type cast to whatever the name of your character is. In my case, I had to type cast to BP underscore Aerodel, and that's where I got this node. I had to make sure that the execution pin was connected, of course. And then I right-clicked on the return value and chose Promote to Variable. And this will bring up a setter that creates a variable that is a reference, you can see right here under Variables, to that other actor, Aerodel. I also have a custom event called AI Roam, and that is called right there on Begin Play as well. So here is the bookended roaming logic. I made a custom event just by using add custom event, and I called it AI Roam. Now, the default character speed is 500. But I decided that while it's roaming, I didn't want it to be running around. I wanted it to be walking. So initially, once AI roam is called, the first thing I did is I set from the character movement component, which I can just drag into the graph anytime I need it, and pull off of there, and I searched for set max walk speed. And I settled on this speed of 210. Out of 500, by the way, which is its maximum. I did a little print string here just to make sure that it was doing what it was supposed to be doing. Orc is patrolling, and I no longer need that because I've already verified that it's working. So I can get rid of that and just reconnect that to the next node. So let's compile and save. Now the next node is AI move to, and we did go over this on Monday. I want to remind you which one to use. AI move to. And it's this one. It's not the one that's going to be highlighted right off the bat. AI move to. And when you get that node, you're going to have to do as follows. This pin that says pawn is not going to be populated. So you're going to want to pull off of there and just type self and use this, get a reference to self. And that will give you what I had before. So this is not like a target. This is asking what pawn is the pawn to be moved. And in this case, it's ourselves. So it's patrolling around, and the destination is going to be get random reachable point and radius. So you can just search for that reachable point until you see get reachable point and radius. And that's the node that I've got here. The origin is going to be populated by get actor location of itself. Remember, we are inside BP_orc. We are in the orc's blueprint. So let's zoom in here so you can see. That's the blueprint that we're in. And this character is ready to go and all set up for you. So you don't have to do any retargeting or anything, but you will have to replicate this scripting. So back to the event graph. Get actor location for the self is the origin. That is wherever the orc happens to be at the moment. And then I have to set a radius in this get random reachable point in radius to some value. And I estimated 1,500 units. I didn't want it to fall off the edge of the plane there that we're prototyping this on. That random location can be plugged into the destination of AI move to. Now, we're not using the output execution pin here because that's not latent. That's going to fire immediately even before the AI reaches its destination. So on success and on fail, I plug that into a delay. So if it arrives at its next patrol point, I want it to stand there for a little bit of time. So with this delay, whether it succeeds or fails, I'm going to have it wait for a random duration. Now, if I didn't connect that, I could hard code a specific number of seconds. But this random float in range, and by the way, this duration is a float value. So I used random float in range, connected that to the duration pin, and specified a minimum of 1 second and a maximum of 3 seconds. So every time it pauses at a patrol point, it's going to wait some random amount of time between these two durations. And when that is completed, then I have bookended this by calling the same custom event roam. So we've got AI roam at the beginning, AI roam at the end, and where is that being called? Right from begin play after I get my reference to Aridel. Okay? I could also have done it off of a sequence here, but this is just fine. Calling AI roam right there. So that's going to start it roaming around. The next part has to do with our pawn sensing. So if I select the pawn sensing component, you can see that there are events associated with it here on the bottom. And one of them I've already used. On C pawn, you can see that it looks a little bit different from the others because it's already in use. I used it right here. And I didn't click one of those buttons, actually. I just used pawn sensing and then right-click, add event. And this on C pawn would appear in this list if it weren't for, you see, view existing events. That's a good way of seeing it, right? I've already used it. So these are the ones that remain. And I just clicked it, and I got this node here, on C pawn, pawn sensing. And I'm calling another custom event that I created down here, which is also, well, you can see AI chase. Okay, to make a custom event, you just have to type add custom event. You can click it, and you can name it whatever you want. Eat, for example. All right, and then whatever that means is what you script after it. Okay, so I'm going to delete that because I don't need it. But I made one called AI Chase, and I did it in the same way that I demonstrated it in class. I first used a sequence node, and forget about the then one for the moment. Pretend the sequence node is not here. In fact, I'm going to disconnect it for a moment. AI Chase went into a setter that came off of the character movement component. So I brought the character movement into the graph. And remember, in the character movement component, we have a parameter or a property called the max walk speed. And that's right here. And I'm sorry, it's right here. The max walk speed, I didn't mean to say max walk speed crouched. That's different. But the maximum walk speed for this character was 500 centimeters per second. But I decided that I didn't want it to be as fast, I guess, while it's chasing us, because our character also has a max walk speed of 500. And I wanted to be able to have Aerodel outrun it. So the first thing I did is I set the max walk speed to a little bit lower than 500. So if I have to outrun this enemy, that's possible to do. After we've done that, I'm using the AI move to node again, but a little differently. We still have to populate the pawn pin with our self, a reference to our self, because that is the pawn to be moved in this node. But this time the destination is not the same as what I did up here. The destination up here for roaming was to get a random reachable point within the radius, and the origin was get actor location wherever this orc happens to be at the moment. But not in this case. In this case, what I had to do is I wanted it to move to Aridel's location. And that's why I cast and got a reference to Aerodel right at the very beginning here and promoted it to a variable. That way, I have access to Aerodel as a variable anytime I need to get information from Aerodel elsewhere in this graph. And in fact, I did need to do that here. I dragged as BP Aerodel and I used the getter. And then from there, I just simply searched for get actor location. And that's Aridel's location. Even though we're not inside of Aridel's blueprint, we're obtaining it from the reference that we created by promoting that variable. Once I had Aridel's location, I simply plugged that into the destination for AI move to. The acceptance radius I might still fiddle with a little bit, and that determines how close the AI is going to move to you before it stops. And I just temporarily set that to 200. I'm not sure that that's the best value, but it defaults to something much smaller, and it would get way too close to you in that case to do anything like combat. Now, why do I have the sequence here? The sequence is here because I want to also be able to evade the sight of that orc and be able to have it lose interest in me. So I'm using this node called a retriggerable delay. And the duration, this duration, only has to be a value. This, by the way, is in seconds, and it's a float value. This must be greater than what is known as the pawn sensing interval. I believe I mentioned that a moment ago. It's in the pawn sensing component. And you can see the sensing interval is right here. Now, again, that defaults to 0.5. That means that every half of a second, it's going to update its sensing interval, which in this case is sight. But I find that when it's set to updating only every half second, it chatters between being able to see me and not being able to see me. So I set it to 0.05, so it updates a lot more frequently. And you can play with that. Obviously, the more times it updates, it has to execute code more often, so it's a little less performant, but at least we're getting the behavior that we want and need, because I don't want it to lose track of me as it's trying to chase me down. So this value in your retriggerable delay is going to be in seconds how much time you're going to need to evade its eyesight, and it must be a value that is greater than the sensing interval, and this easily is. So I just decided 2 seconds. I can make it any value that I want. And if 2 seconds has elapsed and it hasn't caught sight of me again, I simply am calling AI roam again so that it goes back into its roaming state. Okay, it's lost track of me. In any case, after it is chasing me and I've set its speed to a little slower than Aerodel, it moves to Aerodel, and then on success, only on success, I'm calling yet another custom event that I made called Orc Fights. And that is here, the orc fights custom logic. So again, I made another custom event by add custom event. And in this case, I did it and I called it orc fights. Okay, so that's all I did. You can name it whatever is descriptive for you. And I didn't want this to spam, so I used a do once node to control that. You can see it's been reset, and I'll show you where I've done that. And what I want it to do when it arrives to my position and calls that function is that I want to have it play a fighting montage, which I have retargeted to it. So where orc fights happens, we do what we always do. We have done disable movement and stop movement immediately from the character movement component. And then I'm using the play montage node. And we remember from previous lessons that you have to provide the in skeletal mesh component of this character. So I dragged the skeletal mesh into the graph, which is what this is, and simply plugged it in there. The montage is a montage that I made out of one of the animations that I have retargeted onto this asset. And I want to show you that for our orc, let me see, in the orc folder, orc marauder, I've got retargeted animations. You've seen me do this before. And I've got from Manny, I did that first. And in the animation folder, I have the animation blueprint and just the basic Manny animations that it came with, which I've already changed out. In the ABP orc, I just changed out in the Anim graph. Mostly I just changed in the locomotion state machine for the idle pose. This creature human idle, which was retargeted. I left this in the graph just to remind you what it started out as. Replaced it with this one because it looked much, much cooler and was already retargeted to this skeleton. So that's exactly what we want. And in the locomotion state, walk run, there was an existing blend space, but I changed what the animations were, again, from what we have retargeted to ones that looked better to me than the default ones. So that's all I had to do. And I had to modify the animation in the idle state and modify the animations in the retargeted blend space. And that retargeted blend space is here in our very, very basic locomotion state machine. If I go back to the Anim graph, you'll notice that all of that is contained inside of this state machine. And this is what's called a cache. So it's posing this cache called locomotion. And it's got another state machine called main states that deal with locomotion, which was cached, and jumping and landing, and I didn't do anything to those. I just allowed it to use whatever was default because I didn't anticipate making this character jump. Okay, so back to our Anim graph, which I've lost track of right there. I bypassed the control rig, and we have to make sure that this node between main states and output pose default slot has to be there in order for this character to be able to play animation montages. So compile and save. And that is this animation blueprint. So if I open up BP_orc and I go to the viewport and I select the mesh, we can see it says use animation blueprint. And it's this one, ABP_orc. And if I want to find it, I can just click the magnifier and there it is. And this is where we just were. So control rig is a big topic, and it's beyond the scope of this course. So it'd be best if you just leave it in the graph, but disconnect. It used to be here and connect it on both sides. But just disconnect it by option clicking or alt clicking those pins. Leave it in the graph for now, and it's going to do no harm. So compile and save. So that's a fully set up character. And here in retargeted animations, not only do I have animations that I've retargeted from Manny, but from 2 other creature animation packs. So there are animations that I've retargeted here, lots of them that you can make montages from. And also in this folder, lots of other animations that you can make montages from. And I made one montage. You can make as many as you like and randomize them, but this is the montage that I decided for it to use. And you can see that when we played the game, let me hit save all real quick. Hopefully I haven't disconnected anything important. Let me just look at my event graph once again. Yeah, that looks fine. Compile and save. So the idea here is that I'm behind this barrier. It's patrolling right now. Can't see me. But when it does see me, it's going to come after me and start playing that montage. And if I evade it for more than 2 seconds, and I can outrun it, as long as it can't see me, it should be patrolling again. Try to spy on it a little bit there. Okay, so it's patrolling. And I can do that as many times as I want. So it just saw me again. It's going to come up to me. You see 200 is too large of a number for the acceptance radius. So I'm going to have to bring that down. But it's trying to attack me. And of course, we'll flesh that out with even more attacks. I'll also remind you that Aridel is still able to draw her sword. And I've got a whole bunch of animation montages randomized on that character to play for when Aridel is attacking. So that is part 1. That is part 1. I recommend setting all of this up in just a staging area before you put it into your main level. Okay, so now how are we going to deal damage? The first thing I want to do is go into the orc, and I'm going to give it a health variable. So let's click on the plus sign, and we can make this, we could just call it health, and it's not going to be a Boolean. I would recommend that you make this either an integer or a float. For now, let's just simplify it and make it an integer, so it's got to be a whole number. So we'll compile, and what we're going to do is we're going to set the health default value to 100. So it's got 100 points of health right off the bat. Compile and save. And we're going to make it so that every time my sword, or Aridel's sword, I should say, makes contact with this character, it's going to subtract a certain amount of health every single time until it dies. And when it dies, we're going to maybe do some sort of death cry sound and a death type of animation to it. So there's lots of ways to do this, but I'm going to show you a slightly advanced method. A slightly advanced method, but I think it's going to be worth it in the long run to you. This is a very, very efficient way to go. So you're going to make a new blueprint here, and you're going to probably want to do this in its own folder. So I'll make a new folder, and I'm going to call this Anim Notify States. Anim Notify States, which are good for all sorts of things. And we're going to double click to open that up, and we are going to make a custom blueprint class. Not custom, it's in the engine, but it's not one that you see by default. It's not one of the common ones. We are going to have to search for it. Anim Notify State. And this is the one you want right here. Anim Notify State. Select it, and I can name it BP underscore, let's say, Aridel deals damage, or Aridel melee damage. Something like that. Okay. The next step is to open it by double-clicking it. Double-click, okay? And there's this little thing right here that says functions. Let me dock this just to make it easier to follow, okay? Where it says functions, you're going to want to go over to the right where it says override and open this drop-down menu and set it to this option, received notify tick. And that will open up the graph editor. So here in the graph, there's a couple of things that you're going to want to do. So let's move the return node way over, like so. And what we're going to do next, sorry, I had to straighten that out, is we need a node called sphere trace for objects. So I'll right-click and search for it. Sphere trace for, not multi-sphere trace for objects, just sphere trace for objects. Now, what this needs is a start point and an end point. And the start point and end point really should be the locations of sockets that you've made for the sword, but on the primary skeleton of Aridel. So let's just leave this docked for the time being, and we're going to go back and find Aridel's skeleton. So we can go to our third-person folder, Blueprints, bring up Aridel. There's her blueprint, and we want to find the skeletal mesh asset and double-click it. Once we have this showing, we can click on the Skeleton tab so that we can see the skeleton hierarchy here on the left. And we're going to make a couple of points here that are sockets that are relative to the hand. And that's the right hand. So I'm looking for the right hand. We already have a socket for attaching the weapon, but we're going to make a couple more where hand R is the parent. So we'll right-click on hand underscore R, and I'm going to add a socket and double-click it to rename it. I'm going to call it blade underscore bottom socket. And I'm following the conventions here. I'm using underscores. I'm not using uppercase unless it's the word socket. And you can see that that's happened in a couple of places. Really, it doesn't matter what you call it, but you know, this is good practice right here. Now remember, that socket is right now kind of on the hand, and that's not where we want it to be. So we're going to use the transform tool here to get it to be on the basically on the part of the blade where we want it to start. So I'm going to move the transform, and I'd like to have snapping turned off when I do this. Make sure that you look at this from multiple angles. You might want to slow down your camera speed and make sure that it really is on that blade. Because it really can be deceiving when you're not looking at it from the right angle. Okay, you see it's way, way up there. So let's see if we can make that better. And I'm going to change this into a world space transform just so I can move it over a little bit more easily. And down. Make sure that that's on there, just where I want it to be. And that looks good enough, I think, for me. Let me just check from below and above. That's fine. Okay, so that just is something that has a transform. Now we need another socket where the blade ends. So we're going to go back to hand underscore R, right-click, and add another socket. And we're going to rename that blade top socket. Blade underscore top underscore socket. And like our first socket, we're going to have to change its transform. So let's find the gizmo for it. And color blindness is not my friend when I'm doing this, so let's put that back into this mode. Get it roughly near the end of the blade, like so. And again, look at it from multiple angles to make sure it's really on the blade, like the center part. And make sure that our eyes are not deceiving us. Just try to get that as centered as you can, even if it's inside. I accidentally clicked off of it. So let's see, top socket right there. Maybe all the way to the top, the pointy top. I think that looks pretty good. Just about. Okay, I think I'm happy with that. So I'm now going to save the skeleton that way. And now we've got those sockets. And they're going to follow the transform of the sword, which is following the transform of the socket that we put on the hand to hold the sword. So that's what we need. Let's close that window now and go back to our Anim notify state blueprint. So now what we need to do is we need to use the mesh component from the received notify tick and search for get socket location 2 times. So I'll pull off of here and type get socket location. And I guess you can duplicate that. Control D or Command D, and I want that to be from the mesh. And the mesh, by the way, is also going to be your world context object for sphere trace for objects. So we'll connect that over there as well. And maybe just take these and move them down a little bit. So it needs to know a starting location and an end location for this trace. And we're going to use the sockets that we created. So you could go back to the skeleton and remind yourself what they were. But I think it was sword. Oh, you know what? I've already forgotten. So let's go back and find out. Skeletal mesh, where's the skeleton? Okay, so the best way to do this really is by copying and pasting. So where is the blade bottom socket? I'm just going to highlight that and hit Control C. Go back into this blueprint and just paste it in there. Okay, so I know that I can't possibly misspell it. Go back to the skeleton and get the top socket. Copy its name, so I've got it verbatim. Control C. Go back into this blueprint. Paste it in there. So now we know where the start and the end of this trace is going to be. So now what we need to do is we need to make an array out of these object types here. And these are going to be basically types of collisions that we want to be enabled. So we'll pull off of there and we'll type make array. And I want to remind you that in collision profiles, by default, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different types of collision profiles. So let's just add 5 more. We already have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And remember, it ends with 5 because it's 0 indexed. So on index 1, we'll do world dynamic. On index 2, we'll do pawn. On index 3, we'll do physics body. On index 4, we'll do vehicle, not that we have any. And then finally destructible, okay? And we have ignore self so that we don't collide with ourself on that. Now, the execution pin from received notify tick is going to go here into our sphere trace for objects first. And then we are going to connect this to the return node, like so. Now the radius of the trace, I would suggest setting that to something like 15, maybe even 10, something like that for the time being. And turning on this draw debug type and setting it to this option for duration. We're gonna change that later, okay? But for now, please do it that way. So before this return node, actually we're going to disconnect this. And we want to know that we hit something. So this is a Boolean that will tell us whether or not we hit something. So we can use a branch here. And to get a branch, I'm holding down B and left clicking. So here's that branch. I'll connect the execution pin and the Boolean return value so that this will only fire off if something was hit. We can also pull off of the out hit and type break hit result until we get this, which we can then twirl down and we can get lots and lots of information. So what I want in this case is I want to get the hit actor and cast to, in this case, the orc. Okay, so BP underscore orc. Cast to BP underscore orc, like so. And I can't think of any reason why this cast should fail, but if you wanted to, if you wanted to cast failed, you could do a print string. And just, let's see, type in the in string, cast failed. Okay, and that way, if for some reason it does, at least you'll know about it. Okay, but we've cast now to this orc. So I would like to promote that to a local variable, promote to variable. So we now have a reference to the orc. And then if a hit takes place, I want to set the health. So we are going to set health, because that's where that variable lives, right? It lives inside of the orc's blueprint. That's the target. Now, what do I want to set the health to? Well, I want it to be whatever the current health is minus something. So I'll pull off of this variable again, and I'm going to get the health. That is the current health, get health. And that's an integer. So I'll pull off of here and type integer minus integer, okay? Or just minus integer. That's a subtraction. I could have each hit deal a fixed amount of damage, or we can make it unpredictable. Let's suppose that I'll do random integer in range, and that could be a float if you wanted it to, but you'd have to have set it up as a float in the first place. And let's say it'll deal somewhere between 5 points of damage and 10 points of damage. This way, we can never be exactly sure how many times we're going to need to hit it before it dies. And when we set the health, it's going to be the current health minus the random integer within this range, and that's going to update the health variable. And once we've done that, what we could do very, very simply is that we can set up another type of branch here. So I'll hold down B, and right here I'll connect the execution pin, and the condition is going to be whether the health is less than or equal to 0. So this is the current value of the health. And I want to pull off of there and type less equal. Less equal. And leave that as 0. Less than or equal to 0. It returns a Boolean. And if that becomes true, then I want to do something. So at least in the interim, I will, let's say, print a string. We're going to substitute that with something more complex later. But I am dead is what it will say, and we'll make it a color. That's very obvious, and we'll leave it on the screen for a period of time. So we'll go 10 seconds. Okay? This is not going to actually kill it. This is just going to be the thing that is printed to the string, or printed to the screen, I beg your pardon. We can then script something else in place of this print string after we verify that this is indeed working. So that is fairly straightforward, and I don't want to do anything beyond this just yet. Just make sure that the final execution pin is indeed connected to that final return node. And we're going to compile and save. And I have an error here. Set, why is that erroring out? And let me read it. Is read only within this context and cannot be set to a new value. So as bp_org, didn't I just promote that to a variable? As bp_org, that's all I did. bp_org, object reference. Let me do that again. Okay, so promote to variable, or promote to local variable is probably what I want. And we'll say this is the orc reference. Let me try it that way and see if it gives me any trouble there. So as the orc, that'll be the target for the health setter. Yeah, that still doesn't like that. Okay, so I'm not going to even use that as a variable. I will just say like this. As bp_org, I'll connect that to the target pin right off the cast, and we're going to set health, and we are going to get the health, and we're going to use that for the A of our subtraction operation. Okay, now we'll compile and save. This time it gave me no errors. Frankly, I don't know why I could not promote that to a variable, why that errored out, but this should still work. Just want to just check up on everything. This is still asking for a world context object, which a regular print string normally doesn't do, but it might be something peculiar to this class. Let me just check. Regular print string. Yeah. So I might as well do that. I might as well give it its world context object, which is the mesh component, in case it needs that for some reason. Okay, I can't think of any reason why it would, but it's probably not going to do any harm. And it's going to print I am dead. Okay, so let's leave that docked for the time being. And the next step has to do with Aridel. Looks like the skeleton wasn't saved. So let me save that and close that tab so I don't screw anything else up there. So here in Aridel's blueprint, I've got all kinds of scripting taking place. But among that scripting, we also have montages to play right here for all of the sword attacks. So I've got a custom event called attack. I'm managing the states through some booleans, and it's basically all these montages. So what we have to do is we have to open each one of them and add notify states for the duration that we want that collision trace, that sphere collision, to be active. So let me just double check one thing on that. Right here is that the trace is not too gigantic. Radius 15, no, that looks pretty good. I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't set to something gigantic. We don't need this open anymore. You don't need this open anymore. Go to BP Aridel, and we're going to search for these montages one by one. So we're going to hit browse to this first one. There it is. And we'll open it. Okay? And there's already some montages in there for vocalizations and body movement sounds and some sword sounds, and I'll probably add even more. But now I want to add a notified track that's dedicated to the notify states. So let's add a new notified track, add notified track. I'm going to call this melee notify states. like that. And here I can use the scrubber tool to decide when I want the trace to start in this montage, maybe right about there. So here where it says melee notify states, this is the track that we just made. I can right click and I can add a notify state. And in this case, it's going to be it's going to be that blueprint we made, BP Airedale melee damage, okay? That one right there. And this is timed, so you can decide where it starts and where it ends. So I want to end it right when the attack is over and being sort of drawn back toward Airedale's body. Like that. So if I play this, you can even visualize that trace. And we only want the trace active while the blade is in a position where it can inflict damage, like that. Now, I'm going to cancel this autosave here, and I'm going to stop playback on, but I almost stopped the recording. That would have been a serious mistake. So we'll save this, but we have to do this for every montage that we used. So I'm going to go back to Airedale's blueprint, and now I'm going to find the next montage in the list. And once I find it, I'll double click it. And I'm going to do what I did before. I'm going to add a new notify track. And this one, we'll call it the same thing. Even if you don't call it the same thing, it's not that big a deal. But melee notify states. And we're going to do what we did before. We're going to decide where do we want the trace to start. Not yet, but maybe right about there-ish. Okay, so I'll right click, add a notify state, and once again, it's that custom trace that we made, BP Airedale melee trace, and then we can decide where we want it to end. So swoop, and maybe we can end it there. And let's play the montage. And by the way, we should also put a socket on that right foot so that when it kicks, it can also deal damage. But once you get the hang of this, I think that you'll be able to figure it out. You can add sockets anywhere. So that's only tracing when we want it to, right? So we'll stop that or pause that, save that montage, go back to Airedale, select the next montage, open it up. This one I actually added something else. Let me just delete this. That's a different lesson. Adding particle trails. So let me remove this track. Okay, notifies. This is just repetitive, right? We're going to add a notify track. Melee, notify, trace. Says, okay. I don't even remember if I called the other ones exactly that, but we're going to, again, insert a notify track. Oops, excuse me. That was an error. Beg your pardon. Remove that. Melee notify traces. We're going to scrub to where we want it to begin. Click right on that line. Add notify state, the same one. Decide where we want it to end, but I think we're going to have to do this twice because I think she spins around and swings the blade again. So maybe starting there. Add notify state and figure out where we want that to end. Maybe right about there. Okay, and of course we can preview this like we did before. Beautiful. Okay, so far so good. Let's save that montage and we'll move on. We're getting close. Actually, I don't remember how far we got. Have we done this one yet? Yeah. Okay, so that was that one. Okay, so now we need to find this one. So let's pause playback, and we're going to add a notify track. Again, melee, notify, traces. Figure out where we want to begin. Is this an attack? Yeah, like right about there. And don't worry about that. That's just the preview asset that's still showing up on her belt there. So we don't have to add anything for that. Just the sword that is in Aridel's hand. So add notify state. It's the same one we've been using. And maybe I'll leave it on all the way until it gets to there. We could have split that up, I suppose. But we never know where the enemy is going to be around Aradel at any given time, so I think this is appropriate. And I think we've just got one more, so it's this last one right here. And, oh, it looks like I did that one already. So let me just double check all of them one more time. This one. That looks good. This one. That looks good. This one. Might be the same one. Okay. This one. And the first one. Yeah. Okay, great. All right, so these are all done. So let me do save all. And now what we can do is go back here, okay, back into, I'm sorry, this blueprint, which is the Anim notify state class that we made. Now what we can do is we can cause damage with every hit. So if we have a successful hit, we find out what the actor is. The cast didn't fail, so I'm going to remove this print string. And we're going to set the health just like we said. And we're going to attack the orc as many times as necessary until we see on the screen, I am dead.